G'day, F here from Epic Rides and Tours, Sidecar Adventures. As everyone knows, I've done a lot of work on Swampy, which I'm gradually turning out videos of. It's been pointed out to me that I always seem to be doing work on Swampy. Well, not quite true. Yeah. She's the older bike and I bought second hand, but she's been with us for approaching 3 years. So you know, she's done a lot of miles. She's gone along a lot of forest tracks, some of which have not been a smooth ride. In fact, none of which have been a smooth ride. There can't be too many people watching this video that haven't, for instance, experienced corrugations on a dirt track. But believe me, there's a lot of dirt tracks around here, and most of them have got corrugations. Not all the way along, but come on, I mean, you know what it feels like when being shaken to pieces and your eyeballs start whizzing about in their sockets, your teeth fall out. And that's before the artificial ones. But yeah, as part of a top end rebuild on Swampy, I'm doing the carburettors, replacing jets and needles and screws and stuff, and I thought it'd be a nice idea just to go through how the Keihin carburettor, the Keihin Constant Velocity carburettor that's fitted to the 2011 Ural and probably a whole load of others, I just haven't seen them, how they work and what everything is and where it is. So garage is that way, fellas. Oh, and ladies. And anyone who can't decide. Right, so when the air starts rushing through because the engine has started, there's a hole there. It looks like you can see it. Righty-ho. Now, that flow of air past that hole produces a low pressure area in the connector that's under this tap. Okay, on the left hand carburetor, this is the right hand, there is a tube, actually it's a hose, because it's bendy, which is attached to the petrol tap or petcock. Now the petcock on these doesn't have an off position. What it has is an on, a reserve and a prime. Now the idea of the prime permission I'll explain after the next little bit. Okay, so off and reserve are usually self-explanatory, and because there is no off position on the petcock, there's a system that works by the low pressure zone created here and therefore in the hose that goes off to the petcock, and that holds open a valve. There's actually a diaphragm in there which flaps backwards and forwards, a rubber diaphragm and a few other bits and pieces. You can have a look at the video I made, Ural petcock. Anyway, only once the engine has been turned over does this start allowing petrol to come down the hose into here. Now, if there's no petrol in the fuel bowl, you're going to be cranking the engine over for a wee while before it actually fires. And it will probably run rough for a couple of minutes before sufficient fuel has got into the float chamber. and I'll explain that when we get to it. So you have that third position of prime. Now that bypasses the diaphragm on the petcock, or in the petcock, and allows fuel to run directly through here, through the hose to each carburettor and filling up the float chamber. Now once you've started the bike and it's running nicely, you can turn the prime off and set it to on or reserve, whichever is appropriate. It won't actually do any harm if you leave it on prime, unless the float has stuck in the down position. I'll go through that as well. But there, that's the major external parts. All right, so going around here, again, the Venturi effect. Raises and lowers that plunger, some people call it a piston, float, but you'll see there's a nice shiny bit of metal hanging down from it. That's what they call the main jet needle. Now when this end is shut, very little draft goes through it. So we have these two holes here. Now the center one, you can see it's in line with that needle. Okay, and this one goes round the side, and we'll explain that when we get to it. Anyway, so I'll take the float bowl off. Rightio, I'll just move it out a bit. Right, so there's a lot to know about a carburetor. I must admit that before I started doing this, I had no idea about how a Keihin carburetor works. So here's the one off a Swampy. I've described many of these things already, but there's a fair number that I haven't. So where do we start? Okay, if you ever want to take your carburetor off of the bike, open this first. It's a 3mm Allen key to open it, and any fuel that is in the filter bowl, which is not filter bowl, the float bowl, will come out of here. So that's a nice thing to make sure you keep clean. Okay, if you don't drain out through here, at some stage you'll have petrol spilling somewhere you really don't want it to, and of course stick some kind of container under the bottom. So we'll go through the external bits. This is off the right side of the bike, and it has this plate here. It also has another plate which fits to this and then rotates down so that this Phillips head screw can clamp it in position. Now that particular bit comes down with the accelerator cable, the throttle cable I should say. Where am I getting accelerator from? Okay, now this and this parts, the end of the throttle cable has a little cylinder on the end that fits in this position. Okay, you'll see there's a little gap, and the throttle cable will go through that when you're fitting, and pull it back and the throttle cable will go out that way. The reason I'm showing you that is because this could be mistaken and you just have to take it all apart again if you put it on the wrong way. This is fitted for those occasions when the bike may have a throttle cable coming from underneath. Keihin make carbies for Harley Davidson and also for Kawasaki. If you're ever stuck for some of the bits in here, go to your nearest quacker dealer. Okay, I got nearly all the parts that I wanted from the great people up at Ural HQ, Ural up the mountain, and yeah, the only things that they were unable to get was a tiny washer and an O-ring, and I'll talk to you about those further down here. Right, well, this is the fuel bowl or petrol bowl tap effectively. Okay, if you want to take the carburetor off the bike for any reason, undo this bludger. It's a I think it's a 2mm Allen key. Let's have a look. Might be lying to you, it's a 3mm. Okay, I've got these U-Butte Allen keys that are attached to a socket, and they do wonderfully. Right, now I'm by no means an expert on this, but I have done a lot of research, and of course I've disassembled and rebuilt basically the carbies on this bike. And what I found, I did by checking various sources and not believing any of them till I'd found two that had some kind of bona fides that I could ascertain, that I could prove. So I know they're a good source, and at least 3 of them, and they all had to agree. Believe me, there's a load of bull dust out there. Okay, so there's your filter bowl, and this rubber, I'd call it an O-ring if it was circular, but it's gasket. Now, this was one of the bull dust things I saw, or at least you take a bit of grain of salt. The guy said that this never needs changing. Well, I challenged that, because rubber rots slowly but definitely, and the rubber gaskets on both float bowls of this bike had gone solid. They were dead flat, so they weren't really making a nice seal, and they were hard. I had to slash for want of a better term with this fella. It was impossible even to get a small flat blade screwdriver into the side of it and lift it. It just wouldn't budge. So, sharp knife. Anyway, there's the drain that I told you about. There's the drain plug basically, and that's, can we see it? In that, this is the lowest part of the bowl, so it's logically the right place to put the plug hole, and that's it there. I'll get my fist out of the way. Alright, so we'll put that to one side, So we have, in order from top to bottom, this is on the engine side, this is on the filter box side, mixture screw. Some of the literature I've researched calls it a CO2 screw, but yeah, right. And over this side, right in the mouth of the carby there, is a little sharp pin. Okay, don't mess around with it, don't try to push it about, apart from the fact it will probably stick in your finger and make you say naughty words and suck your finger to try and get it clean. It's the other end of this mixture screw. Okay, here's our float. It hangs down and it moves up and down freely. So as our filter bowl fills with fuel, this float starts lifting, okay, and dropping according to the level of fuel in the bowl. So when this is down, we have, I will show it to you in a minute a bit better, there's a little needle which opens and closes a small hole, and that small hole allows petrol to pour into the float chamber, and once the float moves fully up, it will shut that supply off through a hole here. Now I'll take that off and show you. If you've seen one of these before or been told about them from someone who works on Harley Davidsons, they've got these two legs are slightly different, and the pin, this is actually acting as a hinge. This pin can only put through one way on the Harley Davidsons, but on these that's not the case. You can put it through in either direction. And here's the little needle that I was talking about. It's suspended from, can you see that, this tab, and it's suspended by a really fine little springy clip, and you'll find that this little pimple there, it has a groove cut in it that this clips to. I'm going to put that down there for the moment. Okay, so what else have we got in here? This is the hole that I was talking about. Okay, it's connected via a tunnel within the casting of the carburettor. It's connected to this, which is where the petrol is flowing down from the petcock. Okay, so you should be able to see that. Block this hole and it prevents any more petrol from flowing through this until the level of the float drops, because we've used some of the petrol in the float chamber. Right, next there are 3 jets that you can see. Now first off, this is the main jet, and at the very top of it there's a guide. It sits proud of the surrounding body of the carburetor, and it actually has two different ends, so you can only put it back in one way, or it won't work so well. Right, so that's your main jet. This is the starter jet. The starter jet's there to give an extra boost of petrol when you're turning the engine over to start it. And way deep down in there is your idle jet. Now that remember these two holes? Okay, so this one to the right slightly lines up with your main jet. So there's air going through a tunnel inside the casting of the carburetor, and it's blowing air, okay, to drag a drip of petrol off the very tip of that needle. And this one, the starter jet, actually runs off the same tunnel, I believe. I haven't got a proper schematic for these that I can trust. And as I said, down in here, deep down, that's what the Yanks call a pilot jet, and I call an idle jet, because it's in operation when the engine idles. And there's the air intake which takes air through that pilot jet, idle jet, and that bypasses basically everything else. Now when you set this fella, it should be slightly open, just a crack, and we'll get to that later, because that's how air gets through to the engine. You can't starve it of air, it will choke, literally. Right, so the general wisdom is, when you're taking the jets out, you get a flat blade screwdriver. Now, I hope you can see that, which as much as possible fits the slot in the heads of the jets perfectly. Now I'm hoping you can see that. It is a bit small, and anyway, it's plain that this screwdriver is too fat, it's too big, and if you do use something that's too big, or indeed too small, you stand a chance of chewing the heads of these jets. Now the full set of jets and bits and pieces for this carburetor cost me 350 Aussie bucks for the two, okay, for two carbies, which is half the price of a new carby, but it's still a stiff amount. So I'm going to get myself a proper size screwdriver for this job. I'll be back. And here we are. Okay, there's our main jet, and that screwdriver fits all the way to the bottom of the slot, and there's very little slack if I turn the screwdriver. So there's also another way of getting these out, and or at least the main jet comes with something attached, and you can undo that with an 8mm spanner. This, ladies and gents, is an emulsifier. So any fuel that makes its way in here is controlled by the main jet needle that I've shown you. Yeah, pretty darn sure you should be able to see the needle, just the point of it in the middle of that hole. So that needle moves up and down within that emulsifier, adjusting the amount of petrol which can reach these little holes here. Now, this is an old emulsifier. Notice that it won't come undone very easily, so you've got to be gentle with these. Get your 8mm spanner, and then get your perfectly fitting screwdriver, turn gently. That was about a 15th of a 16th of a turn. Right, so okay, there is a narrow channel in here. It actually there's a hole through here, and it has like a restrictor. So when doing this, this little wire came out of one of those little twisty thingos that hold the plastic bag around your loaf of supermarket bread together. And they're a great thing for this because they are very small, and they don't have any rough edges, and that can be put to one side because it's as clean as. Now, to clean the emulsifier, you've got on this side one tiny hole, on its opposite side one tiny hole directly opposite it, and the other two sides have two pairs of holes which are directly opposite one another. Now, I've already done it with this, but nice steady hand, you can poke this through the hole one side and it will come out through the other side. Now, if there's any gunk in there, you've got it, you've poked it out, okay, and you haven't done any damage to the emulsifier. We'll put those back together. Right, now for the starter jet, and notice that's in line with the main jet and therefore with this hole. Okay, so here we go. We can take this one out. It takes the same size screwdriver, take it from me, and this is your starter jet. Okay, remember, it gives you that extra little bit of oomph before the engine starts. Now, it's very difficult to see these, but this has numbering on it, and it also has a symbol. It's a stylized fat K for Keihin and 65. Right, now when putting these back together, care must be taken. This is your main jet up the top, and it has the same fat K for Keihin, and the numbers 122. Now those can vary, okay. Some of the American guys that use the online forums and such live in mountainous areas, so they change the size of these jets, okay. Now talking about size, which one of those is the main jet and which one of those is the starter jet? Because that is the main jet, that is the starter jet. And the easy way to tell them apart is not to drop them into the tray, is the starter jet is longer than the main jet. The main jet has its size printed on the outside of the head. The starter jet has its size stamped into the top of its head. And the reason I emphasize this is because the starter jet can screw happily into the top of the emulsifier for the main jet. If your bike runs after doing that, I'll be highly surprised, unless of course it's running like an old chugger. Right, so put those all to one side and put the main jet into its emulsifier. Now the fun one is in here. Now I had to put a lot of effort when I took all this apart for the first time. I had to put a lot of effort into removing the idle jet. It has its own built-in emulsifier. So just like the emulsifier for the main jet, you can get your little bit of bread bag tie, just strip the paper or plastic off of it, okay. The one thing about these, can you see how I've got the wire going in through the side and directly opposite as its friend, little hole on the opposite side. So there's two on each side, plus that one of course. Right, so in order to make sure all of this works, I'm going to put back the jets. Okay, remember, starter jet is longer than the main jet and doesn't have an emulsifier attached. Basically, that's going to be, if the engine's cold, emulsifying the petrol, I'm gathering, won't actually do much. Okay, and then put in our main jet with its emulsifier, and there. Don't try to force them, because this is all brass, and you try to put too much pressure, you're going to chew up the head of the screws. Right, there goes our idle / pilot jet. Just check that everything is tight and don't rattle, but not too tight. Rightio. So we go to the mixture screw, which allows petrol to be dragged off of the little pin inside here that I mentioned before. Right, so this is the thing that most people will adjust first thing. Okay, which is fair enough. So there's more than just a screw in here though, and when I took my carbies apart, there were bits missing and bits put in the wrong way round. Okie dokie. So in here, if they don't fall out, I'm not going to be too worried, but there's a washer, really tiny washer, and a really tiny O-ring. Now, the reason for the O-ring is to ensure that you maintain a pressure difference between here, which is sticking out in the open air, so it's ambient pressure, and that little hole there, because you've got air rushing past it. Okay, and if you don't have that differential, you're going to get issues with raising the petrol out of the float chamber, among other things. So here's your mixture screw with a pin in the end and the screw bit around the bottom. Here is a spring. Now the reason for the spring is that when you screw this in place, it will stay wherever you set it. It's an anti-vibration device basically, and it keeps this mixture screw in a correct the correct mount in or out, depending on your attitude. Now when you're actually replacing them, you put the washer at this end of the spring, so at the pin end, and then you put the O-ring on top of the washer. Now the reason for the O-ring I've just explained, the reason for the spring I've just explained, and the washer is there. Yep, I can hear you. That is to protect the O-ring from being ripped to shreds by the spring when you turn the screw in to adjust. Okay, now honestly, when I took these apart, one of them did not have a spring, and the other one, the O-ring and washer had been put on the wrong way round. And I've said it a couple of times on other videos that I've made, I have no idea how these carburettors were working and the bike going. So once you screw this all the way in, you don't put any real pressure on it. Just screw it in until it resists, which is about there, and then you turn it back out. Half, one, 1.5. Okie dokie. Now we're setting this up as per factory, and I love as per factory because you usually get the engine running pretty damn close to perfect when you set things up. So again, I am not sure whether you'll be able to see it, but there is a cluster of 3 little holes there, okay, and they allow petrol to be sucked up from these 3 jets, okay. So you really need to be able to see at least part of one of them when the butterfly is closed. Now I can see perhaps half of one of the holes, but we're not actually allowing air to run through here because the butterfly is fully shut. So the last fitting adjustment really is this. It's the throttle top stop screw. Okay, so this lever here, okay, as you might remember from the beginning of the video, is your throttle linkage. So when you twist the throttle, it opens the butterfly valve. Okay, so now I'll over adjust this one to make me point. Okay, I'm just turning the throttle stop screw as far home as I can. There, and you should see an opening, a gap appearing at the bottom of the butterfly valve and at the top, of course. So you're letting through some air, and that air is going past these 2 little holes and this tiny little needle. The Venturi effect, okay, as the air goes rushing past, it produces a area of low pressure, and you then get fuel entering the system to try and bring that pressure up, because nature abhors a vacuum. Okay, so I'm going to readjust that down, and you'll get so far, and you'll start introducing a gap between the tip of the throttle stop screw and this linkage. If you see that, right, now your standard position is with the 2 touching. Okay, now at some stage you may need to adjust that, okay, but this is where it starts from the factory. Rightio, so the next bit to open up is this, but first I'll put the float back in. Okay, here's our float with, if you remember, this little leaf of a tab. Here's the needle with the attached clip. Now the clip fits through the gap and over the tab, leaving it dangling. And drop the float in carefully, and the needle will drop into that hole, which you will remember is where the petrol comes from. And the hinge pin, which goes through, make sure that it has gone through the float, and there you go. Now, just to prove it, goes in and out quite happily from that side, and it goes in and out quite happily from that side. So it's a bit simpler in that respect from the Harley Davidson point of view. There we go. All right, bit of a rattle. There's me showing off to you, and it's telling me. Right, now when we put the bowl back on, these two tabs here sit either side of the two legs, therefore holding the hinge pin in place. And there is only one way right way around to do this. That little diversion meets that one, and you've got two little, they're not actually dowels because you don't have to put them in, but they take the place of dowels, and they've got their matching little holes like so. And of course this is aluminium, which means it's brittle. Okay, so do the screws very gently. Now you'll notice I'm not nipping them up until after I've got all four in position, and me being me, okay, I go diagonally. You can't go diagonally to the next one, but you do it that way. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do it whichever way you like, with whichever screws having the number 1, 2, 3 or 4. Right, so we've now got the top end. Now the top end is how you control the movement of the main jet needle. And first off, we'll take these 4 screws, and they are magnetic, so they stick in my little magnet tray. Take the cap off. The first thing you'll notice is the spring. This end of the spring fits around those 2 tabs. There's the spring, and you can put your finger in this side and pull out. The diaphragm and plunger are one piece. The main jet needle sits there. You push it up and this doohickey comes out. Now, if you read any Ural manual about the carburetors, it will tell you that the carburetors are self-adjusting for altitude. Yeah, I think that's to an extent is correct. When I first got this bike, I took it up to Comboyne, which is on the inland plateau of New South Wales, inland from the mid-north coast. And yep, I came to a T-junction after roaring up some dirt tracks, and got to this T-junction, had to wait for a truck to go past, and the engine idle dropped away. It was going to stop. It was just going to stop until I blipped the throttle. And the reason was this diaphragm, or its predecessor, was worn out. And it was worn out in both bikes. So now down there, that is the needle guide that I told you about. Now it has two ends, like a lot of things. But no, to be serious now, the top end has a chamfer on the inside, so from there to inside the guide there's a little chamfered edge, and the idea of the chamfered edge is that when the main jet needle goes through it, it doesn't jam up. The other end, the top end, the other end of that little cylinder, that guide, is flat. There's also a shoulder around about the halfway point, and it can fall out when you take out the main jet and emulsifier. They actually hold it in place. And right, so at the bottom end is the easiest way to see it. And you see there are two holes. The one right in the middle is for the needle, for the main jet needle. And if I can, there we go, and that drops right through. And the other hole, according to my research, allows an equalization of pressure, and that means that when you put this doohickey, which I call a retainer, down the tube, you have to make sure that the two of the legs on the side where the second hole is don't cover up that hole, and it allows this to a free range of movement up and down. Now these are actually quite busy objects, and they jump up and down a lot. So you can actually take the connection to the air filter out, take the air duct out that fits to this end, and watch this bouncing up and down like fury. So we've dropped it in place, we've got the needle in there, we've got the retainer in there. Don't put the retainer in first, okay? I haven't tested it, but the theory that I have is that you'll probably get something like 5,000 revs out of it within half a second of starting, okay? Because the needle will be sitting way too high and too much petrol will get to the engine. So it is a bit of a trap for the unwary. If you can see in there, there's this circular hole with a lower diameter circular hole. And I mean, the first time I looked at it, I thought, oh yeah, that should be that should be put right around with the needle on top. But I did a bit of double checking just in case, and found out that isn't the case. Right, so you put those in first before you drop the plunger in, and there's only one way to put them in, because these put the other hand down, that's it, these parts are slightly off center, so you cannot put that in wrong. It will just literally fall in place. Now that's the next bit I wanted to tell you. You should be watching through here to make sure that the needle goes into its guide like that. Okay, so try and keep the carby level. It's a bit difficult with the camera here, and it drops down. All right, and the tap all the way round. There's a shaped rim that sits in a groove that's cut into the top of the carby. And the next thing, I call it a dampener spring. There's a few Americans that I've watched and gained some knowledge from. They call it a retainer or retainer spring, up to you which you prefer. And then you put the cap on. Now again, these little raised areas around each hole, all of them, so there's no wrong or right way to put this on, except that you put those two tabs into the top of your dampener slash retainer ring, retainer spring, sorry. I lost a couple of letters there. Oh well. And pretty much that's it. Just put all four of these screws in. And note they're magnetic. Come back here. Right, behave. Like a small child playing for attention. Yeah, so just to make sure that they're all four of them are in, and then nip them up as per usual. And there's your Keihin carb. Before I started doing this, I knew nothing about them. Oh, there is one more thing that I've got to show you actually. Right, and it's the choke. Now, the choke is a bit fiddly to get out. It requires a 14mm spanner. Now, I've prepared this one a little earlier and loosened it. It is fiddly as hell to get a 14mm spanner in there. But that's inside it. Yeah. And basically it connects to a hole, which connects to a fuel channel, which bungs extra fuel through there. And so choke off, choke on. Now, I can't remember which one it was, but one of the two carbies. One of the other things that was wrong with it was that this was bent. But it didn't really seem to affect anything. I could still put the choke on, could still switch the choke off. So yeah, just clumsy workmanship, I'd say. And I'm not going to blame this on the previous owner. He's a nice guy. I think, and you can see there how flipping fiddly it is to get a 14mm spanner in there. Yeah, nicely nipped up. Choke on, choke off. There you go. Yeah, because one of the retainer slash dampener springs was broken too, and the two parts of it had been stuffed back where they came from. The cap had been shoved on top, and yeah, I have absolutely no idea how the bike ever ran. But yeah, anyway, a great lesson for me. I've learned heaps, and I hope that you have too. Cheers now. And just before we put the top back together, I'll take an opportunity. I hope it's going to be seen. The tip of my finger is, you see a little hole there with sort of yellowish colour there. That's actually part of the choke. So the choke switch, choke off, choke on, and this little bit, choke off, choke on. So from that you can see that with all the other things that we've covered, there's going to be a low pressure in here caused by the Venturi effect of air rushing through from one end to the other of the main part of the carby. So that will allow fuel to bypass everything else, going down from there and being caught by the air running through the carby and thrown out the other end to to feed the engine a little bit extra when it's a bit cold. There you go. So I think that's basically all anyone really needs to know, unless they're into deciding carburettors. Yeah. Rightio, a bit of a supplement. A couple of things that I didn't cover well was when the choke is on, fuel still has to come down through here, which means that there has to be some variety of low air pressure created, and that's done by this fella here, I believe. Okay, it just produces that sucking. Some people would tell you it's not, things aren't sucked in, but it's the easiest way for me, and I believe for a whole load of other people, to understand what's going on. Anyway, the next one is our main jet needle guide. I have mentioned it, but I didn't say everything about it. Okay, so it's actually held in place by the main jet emulsifier. Take that out and turn this over. You should be able to plonk with a finger and it drops out. Okay, so that's from the side, and this is from the top end. Okay, now I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it, but there's actually a sort of chamfered edge leading inwards, and that's the end that the main jet needle goes into. In other words, that's the top of it, and the other end is the opposite. It's very, very slightly convex, and that fits the bottom end of the main jet emulsifier. Okay, so that's a nice way to remember if you can't remember which way up it's supposed to go. That's it. So all you do is drop that in from the float chamber end, and then screw in the main jet and emulsifier. Now there's a shoulder on the guide itself, which you can't see in here, but that stops it from being pushed right through here and disappearing. Okay, it's not that hard. It's definitely not what's the word, rocket science, because if it was, I would be just sitting there with my eyes glazed. And the third thing that I realised I hadn't covered was, yes, I showed you this little leaf here that the needle hangs off, the needle that controls incoming flow of petrol and sits in here. Now it's actually a specific setting for the height of the float, and that's done with the hinge pin in place. Okay, there is a drawing somewhere, but I'm not going to tell you the exact figures. I want you to look for yourself. I've found that sometimes Ural change things between years, and something that you might be perfectly good with on a 2011 Tourist, such as this, may be very different on the 2012. Anyway, so the height that the float sits at needs to be correct. Once petrol flows in, if this float goes up too high and continues allowing fuel to come into the petrol chamber, the float chamber, then your carby will flood, and your engine will just cough and die. If it doesn't rise up far enough, then you'll actually find yourself getting a bit short on fuel. Likewise, if it drops too far, you'll get too much fuel coming in. So it is important, and how that's achieved is, I'll just take the pin out there, is by, I always used to say forming, not bending. Bending sounds nasty, but forming the little tab. Okay, you can move it, you can slightly change its position so that when everything's all put together, okay, this drops, and that allows the fuel input valve pin, whatever you would like to call it, the thingo, to drop with it. Now, if you adjust the tab, upwards, okay, that will mean that the needle is going to be in the stop position for longer than it would do before you adjust it. So that in turn controls the actual height of the petrol within the chamber. If you've got no problems with petrol feed, okay, don't play with it. It's just I haven't heard of many people needing to do that unless they've replaced the float, which, you know, can happen. It's plastic, so it will decay and develop holes. It fills up with petrol and stops doing its job. So yeah, I think that's the lot. Well, I hope you found that interesting, informative. If you think I've done something wrong, I'm not a qualified mechanic. I learned my mechanicking at the side of the road on Saturday mornings with me mates, as we used to do back in those days. Round so and so's about 9:30 on a Saturday morning, and helping with that problem on his engine. Anything from fixing the timing to putting in a new engine and gearbox. I've done that. Minus 15 degrees C, that was. I don't want to do it ever again, not at those temperatures. And yeah, if you are a qualified mechanic and you think I could have done something better or described something differently, whatever, down there in the comments, guys, I'm happy to get constructive criticism, ideas, etc., for including something or whatever. But anyway, that's it for today. So thanks for watching, and thanks for staying this long, and see you next time.